The night I was admitted to the hospital for threatened miscarriage, Frank's secretary posted on her social media. In my marital home, Claire, wearing my pajamas, was intimately intertwined with Frank, sharing a toast. Behind them, the bed was decorated with a heart-shaped arrangement of baby burp cloths. The caption read, "Beautiful night, beautiful people." I commented, "I have a thing for cleanliness, remember to clean up before you leave." Frank replied coldly below, "Stop talking nonsense." After seeing the comment, I immediately made a phone call. "Wendy, I've made up my mind. I'll come to Hong Kong to join you in 10 days. "That's fantastic, Lily. Come to my company and I'll give you half the shares. We'll definitely create something extraordinary. I'll arrange for a cleaning lady to clean your room tomorrow. It's ready whenever you are." A few minutes after hanging up, Frank called me. "Not coming home tonight?" His voice was languid, as if he were half lying in bed. In the past, if I wasn't home by 10 o'clock, he would call to ask where I was. Now it was already 11:30. I told him I was staying overnight at a friend's house. He gave a faint "oh" and hung up. Before he hung up, I heard Claire say on the other end of the line, "Frank, you should take a shower." In the past, I would have pressed him to explain. But now, I had no desire to question anything. I started drafting my resignation letter on my phone app. I had been married to Frank for 5 years. I gave up my design dream to join his company, willingly standing behind him, supporting him. My best friend Wendy had told me many times that I wasn't worth it. I was so love-blinded that I couldn't take any advice. I thought Frank and I were truly in love, until Claire appeared 2 years ago. Everything changed. Frank became busier and busier, often unreachable by phone, and didn't come home. He had insisted that I be a virtuous wife and prepare dinner for him every day, yet I ended up staring at cold meals countless nights. Because Frank had too many social obligations, he had a bad stomach. I would habitually wake up early every morning to make him a stomach-soothing tea. I wondered if he would remember me, once he didn't have my tea tomorrow. Before going to bed, Frank sent me a text message. "Lily, I saw your medical report. The doctor said you're in great shape. As long as you exercise and try to conceive, it should be easy." I replied without hesitation, "Okay." I had been feeling pain in my abdomen for the past 2 days. After lunch I had some slight bleeding. Worried, I went to the hospital for a checkup. The doctor told me I was over a month pregnant, but showed signs of a threatened miscarriage. I immediately followed the doctor's advice and was admitted to the hospital for bed rest. Tomorrow was my birthday, and I was planning to tell Frank the good news first thing in the morning. But Claire's post that night made me hesitant. I was unsure whether the arrival of this child at this time was good news or bad. As soon as I put my phone down, I received a message notification. It was the custom tone I had set specifically for Frank. Now I was logged into my alternate social media account. I had registered the account a year ago. During a team dinner, I overheard colleagues talking about Frank's social media. In my memory, Frank hadn't updated his posts for 2 months. I leaned over to see what the fuss was about, and when they showed me Frank's recent social media posts, I realized he regularly updated, but he had just blocked me. I had to register an alternate account to spy on his posts. Tonight's update consisted of 2 photos, one of fireworks at an amusement park, and another of a screenshot of a chat with Claire. It clearly read, "Today I want to sincerely apologize to my secretary because I miscalculated the dinner time, resulting in my beautiful secretary having to wait for me, hungry, at the restaurant for half an hour. To apologize, I took her to the amusement park to set off fireworks. She said she liked it and forgave me. I promise I will never make this mistake again." I zoomed in on the firework picture. The firework was indeed in the shape of a C. I calmly liked the post and texted Wendy again. "Maybe I can go earlier." The next morning, the doctor came for rounds and I requested a termination. The doctor carefully reviewed my blood work and sighed, asking me to reconsider. She told me if I made the same decision in half an hour, she would arrange it. 10 minutes later, I rushed into the doctor's office and signed all the consent forms. A patient had canceled their appointment, so I had the painless procedure done that afternoon. As I lay weakly in the hospital bed, I saw Claire's latest social media update. 2 photos taken at an outdoor restaurant. It was my favorite restaurant. Their food suited my taste very well. I stared at the half-eaten mango sticky rice in front of Frank, completely lost in thought. Frank had been allergic to mangoes since childhood. When we first got together, I tried to feed him a small piece of mango, and he immediately broke out in hives. It was an unintentional mistake, but Frank snubbed me for half a month. He said very seriously to me, "From now on, don't ever let me see you eating mangoes again." I was a huge mango lover, but because of him I had refrained from eating them for 5 years. Looking at Frank, even taking medicine to keep Claire company, I couldn't help feeling a sharp pain in my heart. In the photos, Claire was wearing the sapphire bracelet Frank had bought at an auction a month ago on her left hand. I loved the color blue. When the news about the bracelet was trending, Wendy and I both thought he had bought it for my birthday today. The boy who had promised to celebrate my birthday with me every year had ultimately broken his promise. Yet, I didn't have any desire to call him and question him. I touched my flat stomach and couldn't stop the tears from falling. On my 29th birthday, I lost the child I had been longing for. I didn't regret it because I didn't want him to be born into a loveless family. The man I loved had another woman he loved more. I needed to be calm and I needed to wake up. This marriage had reached its end. I rested in the hospital for 2 days and went home. When I got home, I found Frank in the study having a video conference. I took a shower and was about to sit on the sofa to relax when Frank came downstairs. He glanced at me and said, "Look at the time. You should be making dinner." I'm a little hungry after a 2-hour meeting. Listening to his commanding tone as usual, I couldn't help but sneer. I hadn't been home for 3 days, and my husband didn't seem to care where I had been or what had happened to me. He also didn't mention anything about Claire's post 3 days ago. It was as if nothing had happened. Did he really think he could take me for granted? When we first got together, I was full of enthusiasm, thinking that as long as I offered my heart to Frank, he would eventually understand my sincerity. But reality was always harsh. In the past 2 years, whenever and wherever, as long as Claire called, Frank would rush to her side regardless of everything else. 5 years of marriage, from the joy of finally winning over the person I loved to the disappointment I was now experiencing. I suddenly felt incredibly tired. I sat still, and Frank's face immediately turned ugly. "Lily, are you deaf? Go make dinner now. What are you staring at? You're a useless person who does nothing all day. Who gave you permission to give me an attitude?" I clutched my still aching abdomen and shook my head, refusing. "I don't have the energy. Order takeout yourself." After graduation, Frank had taken the initiative to have me join his company so I could stay with him, saying it was because he wanted to see me every day. I never expected that only 5 years later, I had become a useless person in his eyes. It seemed that, in Frank's eyes, Claire was better than me in every way. Even though Claire was divorced, she was the most perfect girl in his eyes. I remember 2 years ago when Claire had just started, I saw Frank several times chatting and laughing happily on the phone with her. Whenever I expressed a little dissatisfaction, Frank would say to me with a displeased expression, "Why are you so narrow-minded? We're just talking about work." Frank never hid his admiration for Claire, always praising her when he mentioned her. At first, I didn't take it to heart. But in the past 2 years, Frank had come home later and later. Sometimes, even when he wasn't on a business trip, he wouldn't come home for several nights in a row. He was hard to reach by phone. Every time I asked him what he had been doing, he would only use working overtime or attending social gatherings as excuses. His dissatisfaction with me escalated, and sometimes he even verbally abused me. He said that he would be focusing all his attention on work during these 5 years, and that he wasn't familiar with many aspects of the business after taking over the company, so I believed him. I thought he was genuinely busy with work. Frank came from a divorced family and despised cheating the most. I never thought Frank would betray me. When we got together, I told him that even if he stopped loving me later, he should tell me the truth. Now, seeing their lovey-dovey posts, I couldn't deceive myself anymore. Seeing that I didn't respond, Frank was furious. "I was originally going to reward you today, but with this attitude you can sleep in the guest room tonight. Don't even think about coming back to the master bedroom." With that, he rushed to where I was and kicked me with his foot as he sat on the sofa. I can give you another chance, go make me a bowl of noodles, and I might forgive you this time. Looking at his imperious attitude, I asked him directly, do you remember what day it was 2 days ago? Being interrupted, Frank frowned and opened his thin lips slightly. I looked away and chuckled coldly. Never mind, it doesn't matter. Although I had already expected that Frank had forgotten, his reaction still deeply hurt me. I remembered 2 months ago, when I had appendicitis surgery, Frank had messaged me in the morning to wait for him at the hospital. But I couldn't get in touch with him until the evening. It rained heavily in the city. When I got home, I was soaking wet, and the wound was throbbing because of the water. Frank tried hard to remember. Then his tone became impatient. There's a problem with the construction site in the western suburbs recently. There's a lot going on at work. If you have anything important, you can just tell me. Don't speak in riddles. I'm really tired. Listening to his short speech, it seemed that from beginning to end, my anxiety and questions were nothing but me being unreasonable. Just then, Frank's phone rang with the custom ringtone, and I saw the contact name. Claire baby. Frank looked at me and went to the side to take the call. After hanging up, he grabbed his jacket and said, make 2 boxes of cookies by 8 o'clock tonight. I'll have the driver pick them up. Since I got together with Frank, I would make him cookies every so often. My intention was that he might be too busy and could get hungry at the company in the evening. Seeing me in a daze, Frank asked, what's wrong? Is it difficult? I shook my head and replied, no, I'll go out and buy the ingredients soon. If it wasn't for Frank's help during my sophomore summer, I might have been harmed by those 2 drunkards. I had repaid the favor I owed Frank all these years. I wanted to make 2 boxes of cookies for him as my final act. I looked at Frank's back, reminiscing about our past years together. Frank suddenly turned back. I've transferred the money to you. Make them with care. I opened my chat history with Frank. Most of the entries were transfer records. Frank rarely responded to any of my casual conversations. I transferred Frank's $20,000 back. At 8 o'clock that night, I received a call from Frank. The driver has gone to pick them up. Are you home? I gave a faint and I heard Claire's sweet voice on the other end of the line. Lily, Frank said that your cookies are so delicious. It's my birthday today and I was insisting on trying one. Thank you so much. You're really amazing. I've never made anything like this in my life. Frank says these hands of mine are only good for eating. Claire wanted me to come to her birthday party with the cookies. Frank rejected this immediately. She doesn't need to come. Without waiting for me to speak, Frank hung up. After being busy for so long, my back was so sore that I couldn't stand up straight, and I certainly wasn't going. I had just finished showering and was about to rest when I received a message from Frank. 888, come pick me up. I struggled to get up. When I pushed open the door to the private room, Frank and Claire were passionately embracing. Seeing me, Frank was surprised. I could see from his expression that Claire had sent the message to me. Claire sweetly approached me and called out, Lily. Frank glanced at me and said sternly, doesn't what I say matter? I directly opened our chat history and showed it to him. Wasn't it you who sent the message? Frank looked at Claire in confusion. Claire pouted and clung to Frank's arm. Frank, it was me who sent the message. I was worried you might drink too much and no one would take care of you. Seeing Claire willingly admit to her mistake, Frank smiled and pinched her cheek, not blaming her. I took out 2 resignation letters from my bag. I was not originally in the HR department, but many people in the company knew about my relationship with Frank, and sometimes HR matters would be entrusted to me to handle. Frank certainly didn't expect that these 2 letters were my own resignation letters. He looked at them for a second and then signed, which made me very happy. Otherwise, if I gave them to HR, the director would certainly not approve them. I watched him sign them with satisfaction and was about to leave when Frank grabbed my wrist. Did you come here just for this? When I nodded, Frank, although suspicious, still let me go. He was holding my left hand. When I made the cookies that evening, I accidentally cut myself with the blade of the egg beater. After stopping the bleeding, I put a bandage on it. At this moment, Claire pointed to the jade pendant around my neck and praised. The CEO's wife is so different. Even her necklace is so unique. I also looked at the bracelet on Claire's hand. It was very eye-catching and very much my style. Listening to her sarcastic tone, I couldn't help but reply, "We are all company employees, what is the difference?" After leaving the club, I directly took off the pendant from my neck. Frank had told me that this jade pendant was his grandmother's most beloved object, and that I received it meant his family liked me. After getting in the car, I received a call from my mother. She asked how my birthday was, and why I hadn't accepted their transfer. I repeatedly replied, "I have money. You keep it for yourselves." That night, Frank returned home as usual, worn out. I pulled him to sit down next to the sofa and took out 2 divorce agreements from under the table. Without even looking at them, Frank tore them to pieces in anger. Frank roared at me, "It's been several days already. I've said what I needed to say. How long are you going to make a fuss?" I ignored him, appearing as if I couldn't be bothered. Frank sighed in frustration and said, "Then just be angry, I'm leaving." I packed my luggage for 2 days at home. Frank hadn't returned home in these past 2 days. I sent him a message, "Let's get divorced." After sending the message, I immediately turned off my phone. 2 hours later, the plane landed. Just as I was exiting the gate, I saw a familiar face that I hadn't seen in a long time. I spread out my arms and rushed toward my parents. After getting into the car, I noticed that my parents had bought me the pancakes I loved to eat when I was a child. I didn't expect that an hour later the pancakes were still warm. My parents noticed that my lips were pale and said to me with heartache, "My girl, you've lost weight." Looking at my parents' caring expressions, my nose tingled, and I couldn't hold back my tears. I hugged my mother and sobbed, "I miss you all so much." When I was little, I longed for my mother's embrace. Every time I encountered happy or sad things, the first thing I did was rush into my mother's embrace for comfort. My mother gently stroked my hair and replied, "We miss you too, and we're always worried about how you're doing." After getting home, I took a hot shower and fell asleep in my familiar bed. When I woke up, I turned on my phone and saw that a colleague had sent me many messages. She asked me why I had suddenly resigned and if something had happened. Everyone said that I was completely in love with Frank. They probably couldn't figure out why I had suddenly resigned. Just when I was thinking about how to tell her what had happened recently, she sent me a video. She said that my resignation had caused quite a stir, and that everyone in the company was talking about it. I was the head of the art group, and I thought that my sudden departure was what had caused the team to lose its core leader and be unable to deliver the project on time. But when I watched the video, I realized it wasn't like that at all. There were 3 people in the video: Frank, Claire, and the HR director. Frank was angrily pointing at the HR director and asking, "Why did you approve her resignation without asking me first?" The HR director, a woman in her 30s, was trembling from Frank's anger and was constantly apologizing to him. Claire was also speaking up for the HR director. "Frank, Lily willingly resigned. Maybe she has other plans? Don't blame Ms. Song. She was just following the rules and procedures." Frank's knitted brows gradually relaxed after hearing Claire speak up for the HR director. Seeing this, the HR director quickly thanked Claire and ran away. The video ended with Claire cupping Frank's cheeks. I stared at the phone screen for a long time, unable to look away. I didn't know when Claire and Frank had started openly engaging in such intimate acts at work. Just then, a commotion erupted outside the bedroom door. I was about to open the door to see what was going on when Frank burst in. He was holding the divorce papers that I had sent him through my lawyer. Frank angrily demanded, "Lily, what is the meaning of this? First, you quit without a word. Then you send me divorce papers through a lawyer?" I responded with a cold face, "I don't mean anything. I just feel like I can't go on with you anymore. Sign it. Sign it so I can give way to Claire." Frank looked at me in astonishment, as if he couldn't accept that these words were coming from my mouth. "Lily, there is a limit to your foolishness. I know you're angry, but Claire and I really don't have the kind of relationship you imagine. It's been a week already. You should be over it." Frank stared at me with a livid expression. If this had happened before, I would have become anxious at the slightest hint of a frown from him, and would immediately try to please him and apologize. But now, looking at his eyes full of anger, my heart didn't stir at all. I looked at him calmly. "You need to think hard about what you really want. You are unconditionally spoiling Claire, but you also refuse to let me go. What is that about? Frank immediately looked embarrassed. Claire and I just have a working relationship. We just contact each other a lot during the day. I pointed to his neck with a grim face. When you lie, remember to check if your disguise is working. Does work leave hickeys and kiss marks on your neck and behind your ears? Frank was silent. After 5 years together, I knew his micro-expressions very well. If he gently clenched the hem of his shirt, I could tell he was flustered. I rubbed my temples, my eyes full of weariness. Sign it. Then you can be with the person you love openly, and I can be free. With that, I got up to leave but was stopped by Frank. Where are you going? We're not done talking. The next second, he tore the divorce papers to shreds right in front of me. His tone was menacing. I can tell you very clearly, I will not agree to a divorce. My parents, hearing the commotion, opened the door and stood in front of me saying, Lily is a sensible child. If you hadn't broken her heart, she wouldn't have asked for a divorce. But since she has decided, you should respect her. My eyes welled up with emotion. I had originally thought my parents would try to persuade me. But when I told them that I was going to divorce Frank, they just sighed lightly and said, We will unconditionally support any decision you make. Seeing that my parents were both protecting me, Frank couldn't help but say, Lily, you were the one who wanted to marry me. For such a small thing you are using divorce as a threat. How childish. I will not divorce you. Now is the critical period for the company's acquisition. If it gets leaked, you know the consequences. I sneered at him, not expecting that even now, he was still using the company's interests as a threat. I had never imagined that the focus of his attention when I proposed divorce would be that I possessed the company's core secrets. It was only now, after hearing him say these words directly, that I understood. If it wasn't for the fact that I held the company's core secrets, our relationship probably wouldn't have lasted until today. But my heart was like a stagnant pool. I didn't want to tangle with him anymore. I directly had my parents throw him out. My parents comforted me for a long time and told me to go out and hang out with my friends. They also mentioned that my childhood friend Owen had returned to the country a few days ago. The Luo family had a strong reputation locally. It had been a long time since I had seen Owen, so I called him directly. Who knew that half an hour later, I had just finished showering and hadn't changed when Owen appeared in my living room. He was much more handsome than before. The boyishness had faded, and he had matured quite a bit. He gently walked up to me, touched my hair and said, Long time no see, Crybaby. The nickname Crybaby had followed me for a long time. It wasn't until I left for Jiang City that no one called me that anymore. Now with Owen's return the nickname was back. I said to him somewhat unhappily, Can you not call me that name? I'm a grown-up now. Owen bent down and looked at my face saying, Your eyes are swollen and red, you've clearly just cried. You're still a crybaby after all these years. What else would you call you? I couldn't argue with him, so I had to let him be. As I was going downstairs, I noticed that Frank's car was still parked downstairs. He was sitting in the car, talking on the phone with someone. Owen glanced at me, pointed at Frank and asked, Is that your ex-husband? I just saw him a while ago, he seems very arrogant. Frank had finished his phone call at some point. He got out of the car and shouted at Owen, Who are you calling arrogant? Owen was also someone who had grown up being pampered by his family and wouldn't give in. You. What's the problem? A man who can't even keep his own wife has no right to be yelling at me here. Upon hearing this, Frank directly clenched his fist and rushed at Owen, punching him twice in the face. Frank's punches were heavy, making Owen's mouth bleed from just 2 punches. Of course it didn't end there. Frank pinned Owen to the ground and demanded in a harsh tone, What did you say? Who do you think you are to try to educate me? Since I was little, I had always hated seeing others bully my friends, and Frank was no different. I pushed Frank forcefully and shouted, Let him go. Seeing me protect Owen, Frank's anger intensified. Our shouting attracted the attention of the surrounding residents. Everyone surrounded us, discussing what was going on. What happened? Isn't that little Luo? Why did someone hit him? That seems to be the daughter of the Lu family, right? What's their relationship with her? The one doing the hitting seems to be her husband. I saw him once before. Oh. Hearing everyone's hushed discussions, My head was about to explode. Many onlookers had already posted videos online. I couldn't help but say to Frank, "Frank, we don't have to make this public, do we? Look at how many people are watching. If this blows up, it will damage your reputation." My parents finally came over after hearing the commotion. Seeing that Owen had been injured, they also helped me pull Frank away. At this time, Frank's phone rang. He hung up twice in a row. Without looking back, he said, "The company has an emergency. I'll come find you after I'm done," and hurried off. For some reason, most of the neighbors who were looking at me had sympathy in their eyes. I took Owen, who had blood all over his face, to the hospital. Because of the severity of his injuries, Owen was directly admitted to the hospital. Sitting by his bedside, I thought back to the days when I had been admitted alone, and I fell into a deep reverie. I don't know how much time had passed when Owen gently patted my shoulder and asked, "What are you thinking about?" I shook my head and replied, "Nothing, just thinking about some random things." I called Wendy again, telling her about everything that had happened here. I had to wait until Owen was discharged before I could leave, otherwise my conscience wouldn't let me. Frank was taken away by the police for questioning after his assault. Claire had called me about it. She cried on the phone, begging me to save Frank, but I revealed the truth. "This is all part of your plan, isn't it? You only like Frank's money, so if you don't want to fight, waiting a few days isn't a big deal." When Claire heard that I had seen through her, she stomped her feet in agitation, calling me a busybody. Me a busybody? The rumors I've heard about them these past 2 years are countless. Sometimes there were even videos, but I didn't know why Claire was so nervous about Frank being arrested. Perhaps she was really afraid of losing her big money tree. I took the initiative to offer to keep him company overnight. That night, Owen pestered me to tell him the story of how I got together with Frank. This was akin to tearing open the wounds in my heart and sprinkling salt on them again. I didn't want to talk about it, but I couldn't resist Owen's desire to know. I told him the whole story from the first time I met Frank to our wedding. After confessing everything, I felt like the boulder that had been weighing on my chest had finally been lifted. During dinner, Owen even ordered me 2 cups of milk tea. He joked, "Your habits are still like a child's, liking milk tea and liking water." Seeing me happily accept the milk tea and smile, Owen said to me, "You should be like this, cared for and not bullied." I smiled and replied, "Who knew I'd meet the wrong person and go through all this?" At that moment, Owen's phone rang. After hanging up, he opened his computer and I saw pictures of Frank and Claire's time together. I had been constantly saying I wanted to go to the beach in High City, and Frank had always said he was too busy, but the photos showed him taking Claire there during the first half of the year. They even dressed up and took several couples' photos. Although I was somewhat prepared, my heart still clenched when I saw this evidence with my own eyes. Seeing my eyes filled with stars, Owen sighed and said, "If you want to cry, then just cry. Don't keep it inside." I thought that Frank had gone back to Jiang City immediately after receiving Claire's phone call, but I never expected Claire to follow him here. The doctor said that Owen needed more protein to recover quickly. My mother had made him a pot of ginseng chicken soup. As I was downstairs getting dinner, I ran into Frank, who had just finished bandaging his injuries. I tried to pass by him with my head down, but he grabbed my wrist. "Lily, let's talk." I forcefully shook Frank's hand off and said angrily, "I have nothing to talk about with you. Just sign the divorce papers. I have to bring dinner to the patient, so I can't stay." Who knew that Frank would directly become my tail, following me all the way to Owen's hospital room? Owen's eyes were sharp. Just as I pushed the door open, he asked, "What? Is he worried about you and here to check on you?" I laughed coldly and replied, "I don't know what he's here for, maybe he's here to apologize." Honestly, I had never seen Frank apologize. He had always been the school bully. No one dared to provoke him. Naturally, he would never apologize to other children for anything. Owen was a very vengeful person. Seeing Frank voluntarily come to his door, he said some extremely nasty things. "What? Here to see a patient and you didn't even bring fruit? So uncultured. No fruit, no apology, you can leave now." Frank's face darkened immediately. He clenched his fists, seeming to be trying hard to control his emotions. I was afraid that he would start hitting people, so I quickly stood in front of Owen and said, What do you want? Don't do anything reckless. This is a hospital. However, Frank ignored me and went straight to Owen's bed, looking down at him. What did you call me just now? Say it again. Frank's voice was ice cold, making the temperature of the whole room seem to drop a few degrees. Owen was clearly intimidated by his aura but still tried to appear calm and retorted, I said you're uncultured, so what? Before he could finish, Frank grabbed him by his collar and lifted him off the bed, shouting, I think you need a lesson. Seeing this, I immediately called for security to control the agitated Frank. Smelling the aroma of the chicken soup I had brought, Frank gradually loosened his grip. He just has some minor injuries, and your parents are even making food for him? Owen said as if he was showing off. Lily and I have known each other for over 10 years. Isn't it normal that she makes me some food? Owen had no idea how petty Frank could be. After I joined the company, when Frank saw that all the men in our art department had been transferred, I complained to him a few times saying, without any handsome guys, I'm a lot less motivated to work. Since then, Frank often took me to his office and let me rest on the bed there. Over time, my colleagues at the company saw what was going on. Frank didn't hide it. After being discovered, he announced our marriage on the company's website and posted our wedding photos. After the security guards arrived, they directly took Frank away. I stared at his back for a long time, and Owen couldn't help but frown and ask me, What? You called the police yourself, but now you're feeling bad. I sighed and replied, No, I'm just wondering how we ended up like this. Owen's injuries recovered well, and he was discharged from the hospital 3 days later. During these 3 days, I told Owen about my future plans. Owen said he wanted to go to Hong Kong too. I looked for half a day but couldn't find any relatives of Owen's in Hong Kong. But Owen was insistent, and my parents said that since he was so determined, we could just take him with us. The luggage was already packed, so we boarded a plane to Hong Kong the next afternoon. On the way, Frank kept calling me. My parents told me that Frank had come once at noon with 2 boxes of gifts, but they had stopped him at the door. Frank was furious, and the last thing he said before leaving was, I will never agree to a divorce. Owen, seeing this, thoughtfully said, Don't let him affect your mood. Let's eat first. I nodded and shared a delicious snack with him. Wendy had arrived at the airport 2 hours early to wait for me. I saw her holding up a banner as soon as I came out. I quickly told her to put the banner away. I didn't want my bare face to get on a trending topic. Wendy is my best friend. Our friendship was one of those love-hate situations. On the first day of school, we were both responsible for patrolling the safety of the love classes. I had asked Owen why he was going back to school after returning from his studies abroad, but he laughed at me and said, Is it bad to have one more skill? To help me get on my feet. After dinner, Wendy gave me the transfer contract to sign. As promised, Wendy and I split the company 50-50. Claire cried on the phone saying, Lily, can you please say a few good words to Frank? At this moment, although my mind was a little chaotic, it did not affect my ability to speak. Say good words? I was puzzled. Frank was practically trying to bring down the sun for her, yet she was still complaining about Frank's temper. It's over between us. There's no point in you talking to me. I hung up on Claire. At this time, I didn't want any further contact with her. Although I still had some reluctance, I knew that divorce was the right choice. Wendy patted my shoulder. Okay, if you're sure, then sign this contract. We're partners now. We'll make the company stronger together. I picked up the pen and signed my name without hesitation. From now on, I would start a new life. I entrusted the divorce case to my lawyer, who had been collecting evidence these past few days. Half a month later, my divorce case with Frank went to court. Because the evidence my side provided was sufficient, Frank was ordered to leave with nothing. After achieving my goal, I happily slept for half a day. I was awakened by the smell coming from the kitchen. I found Owen wearing an apron and making soup. I found the scene quite funny. Owen made a table full of food for me. Wendy also praised him for his cooking skills and that he was a treasure of a guy. Seeing that my evaluation was also high, Owen gradually relaxed and showed us many pictures of him cooking when he was abroad. Owen's parents had arranged expensive business courses for him. He was even busier than me every day. I felt like I barely saw him. After being kicked out, Frank did not give up. The nurse said he had been coming every day, but he hadn't been knocking on the door. Owen had given Frank the nickname Coward. Late that night he sent me a long message, with every line describing his recent state and his low mood. I didn't reply to a single word. A month later, the national design competition was to be held. I was determined to have our studio take home some awards. I also saw Claire's registration information for the competition. How dare she, someone who was only just starting out, challenge me? I focused all my energy on the competition and often forgot the time. Claire came to see me and asked me to name my price to give up on this competition. She may as well have written Gold Digger on her face. I recruited several team members and it really felt like we were made for each other. After I came, Wendy could go out and play without worry. She would party till midnight, then would have a headache the next day and wouldn't be able to go to work. Every time I grumbled about it, Wendy would say, "You're a shareholder too. You can handle things when they happen." Like this, I had been busy for 3 months before I took my team out to find inspiration. After the initial design was done, I took a sigh of relief. After not using the pen for so long, I was still capable. Even I was very happy with it. Claire had come to see me twice. The second time she came, she was beaten black and blue. She had no parents, no ability, and no money. After losing Frank, this great tree, she had been living very poorly. But even so, the money they needed to give me couldn't be a penny less. Half a year later, the design competition began. I went all the way from the preliminary rounds to the finals. Not only was my work recognized, but it also showed that our hard work all these days had not been wasted. On the day the results were announced, Frank also came to the venue. I saw him applauding for me. A year later, I held a solo exhibition in Hong Kong. Frank was not with Claire, but with another man. I didn't greet him. We had reached a point where we had nothing to say to each other. Owen and I spent a whole year together, and he confessed to me on my birthday. I accepted his confession and said thank you, while burrowing into his embrace. I was very grateful for their unwavering support, and I was also grateful to myself. One evening, Wendy asked me a question. "Do you regret marrying Frank?" I thought about it for a night, and my answer was no. I feel like every step I took in my life is meaningful. Owen and I will definitely have a bright and beautiful future.